Hair looks good today, man.
Thank you. Didn't really do much to it. Just,
Just natural.
He busted my horns about not being camera ready this morning.
Yep.
Your shirt is a bit wrinkly.
Highside, Lowside, electric bikes, take one.
Boom.
All right, it's time to start the show. You got to get serious.
Get
Electricity.
serious.
Bzz. Howdy. This is Lemmy with RevZilla. Welcome back to another Highside, Lowside. I'm joined yet again by my colleagues, Joe Zito. We got Spurgeon here for the penultimate Highside, Lowside of the season. We've got a topic on deck today that I'm pretty charged up about. I think it's going to spark a lot of conversation.
Stop it.
Now, if my colleagues' reactions have not tipped you off yet, we're going to be discussing electric motorcycles today.
But before we dive into it, just keep in mind that we do have the podcast component of this. So if you want to listen in your vehicle or wherever you get your podcasts, you can always type in RevZilla, Highside, Lowside, and check us out in podcast form. The one thing we'd love to see you do, in addition to all the great comments that are left for us in the YouTube section, if you could leave a review on iTunes, that would really help us out as we work to garner a larger audience in the podcast form.
If you're going to ask for something, at least ask for it correctly. If you could leave us a great review.
Yeah. If you
Just
don't
really
like
good.
what we're saying,
Right,
just don't.
you don't have to do
even
that.
don't
Right.
even think about iTunes existing. But if you like what we're saying, then head over to iTunes and leave a comment for us.
Alrighty. Question one, guys. Let's go. Let's take a little field trip to the future right now. Let's fast forward in time when things have stabilized a little bit. So, in your opinion, fellas, what portion of the motorcycle market, of all the motorcycles we're going to see out in the world, are going to be powered electrically?
How far ahead into the future?
I don't know. You tell me.
We're looking at 5
times.
years, 10
You have a lot of
years.
things you want to say. Go for it.
Honestly, I think they're going to keep growing. I think more manufacturers, major brands, are going to offer maybe one or two as we go on in the future, because we're starting to see everything happen in the automotive world. Seeing a lot of different, major manufacturers offering an electric model, whether it's to stay competitive or because they actually feel like that is the way of the future. I'm not really sure, but the motorcycle world does eventually follow the automotive world a few years behind.
So that's the biggest thing. I think right now, electric motorcycles make the most sense in a track setting because
I do agree.
I mean, they don't work for the touring segment. They work for maybe the commuting segment.
There's that commuting that work very well.
I think, city commuting, but really the way that I see motorcycling moving forward with electrics, we're going to see it really spark the most in the dirt segment and then possibly street track bikes. But street track bikes is such a niche offering. I think it's really going to be dirt is where electric motorcycles is going to be the big push in the future.
So my thought here is this is all gonna hinge on batteries. Depends what the cost is like. Depends obviously what the range and the charge time is like. And I think the other big one too, the big driver that a lot of people don't talk about, but it is important, is warranty. I mean, are you going out to buy an 8-year-old electric motorcycle? No. Somebody better be giving that thing away.
But let me ask you a question. I mean, if you could get a brand new battery with that, the battery is the biggest technology.
So if you've got a hot
wear.
swappable system, obviously the value of a used bike goes right back up to
Because I believe
normal.
I was reading that with KTM with their freeride electric bike, was that you could actually buy the older version but swap it out with the new battery that was much longer
Which
in
makes
life.
them upgrade. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think Zero has done that on several of their bikes, where they'll give you a firmware update or all.
I would think that would be the smartest way to see it carry through in the future.
Maybe. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
All right, I think we did that one to death. Okay, so now let's move on to mechanically, because I like nerd mechanical stuff. You're like that too. I know you're not maybe as into it as we are.
No, not nerdy.
Pros and cons of an electric drivetrain.
Dude, when you think that all of us got here to this building today on 130-year-old 4-stroke engine technology, it is mind-blowing. We're still using a bucket of oil with a spinning crank and pistons going up and down and valves opening and closing. Come on, dude. We should be so far beyond that.
The technology today
works really well. We're still using the screw to fasten things. That's very old technology. It works great.
But the engines of today are, I think it's they're polluting 1% of what they were seeing from 1960. So there's been a huge evolution in the technology of the combustion engine, especially when it relates to air pollution.
I'm just surprised that by the 60s we put a guy on the moon, but we're still using pistons and spark plugs and valves and things going up and down. You know what I mean? Come on.
I'm revoking your old Triumph rights. They've been revoked.
They're fantastic in their own way. But I just think that, from a mechanical standpoint, an electric motor makes so much more sense. There's so little parts that go along with it. When you think about a fuel burner, you need an exhaust system, you need a cooling system, you need a transmission, you need, all these different things. Whereas an electric motor is literally a battery, a motor, and a controller.
Right.
Some of them have cooling systems and some of them have transmissions, but really it's just 3 parts.
Yeah.
And there's no reciprocating mass. There's no vibration.
From a drivetrain standpoint, and again, I think for me, the success is going to come down to how similar you can make it feel like the motorcycles we're already used to. Now, I don't think that'll carry over to the next generation so much.
I don't know about that. I don't think that electric bikes do necessarily have to feel like their gas counterparts. In some ways they do, in some ways they don't. One of the things, to go back to an electric drivetrain that I think is cool is that you can dial in the amount of engine braking you want. Something you really can't do very easily on a of your standard
it's
four-stroke
way more
engine.
efficient too. You could recapture that energy with the regenerative braking.
But one of the things I think is interesting is, Joe and I are definitely old bike guys. Like we spend a lot of time riding and even more time probably fixing these old bikes. And it's weird. It's almost those old bikes that make me want an electric bike. These things are damn near maintenance free. When you remove all these systems, to your point, what's the actual maintenance you're doing on an electric bike? You can do a clutch if it has a transmission, but most don't.
Brakes and tires.
Brakes, tires,
Suspension,
like
oil.
your friction stuff, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, your swing arm bearings and his steering head bearings, etc. But you just remove so many things. No valve adjustments, no oil changes. You're not dropping coolant ever.
Yeah, no spark plugs.
Yeah, there's just so many things.
Let me ask you this: is that going to be problematic for the motorcycle industry? Because if I buy a motorcycle, it's an electric bike, and it's already got all the greatest suspension and braking technology on it, what's left to upgrade? Batteries. And if they make it where the battery's swappable, really do motorcycle companies become battery companies in the long term? Am I just buying the newest, greatest battery for my existing motorcycle?
Is your argument that they could make a product that was so popular and so many people would buy it and love it that the business won't succeed?
No, but I guess my question is like if you're already at the top of the suspension game, the top of the braking game, I guess if the batteries provide more power, I guess it's going to be the power evolutions that come out of it.
You kind of made me think of something else though that is relative to our CSC, whereas the biggest hurdle of people buying the CSC, the mail order, four cycle motorcycle engine, bike that we have here, is there's no dealer, there's no support. What if it breaks down? What if we have to take it for a tune-up? Well, if an electric motorcycle is so maintenance free, maybe that's a mail order company. Maybe there is no dealer. There's no brick and mortar.
Brides and bikes.
Well, I think that's
Spurgeon. Wait a minute. This could have legs for you.
I think this could be a separate conversation about the dealer network in America.
Yeah.
But I do think you make a valid point. Like if it's maintenance free to the point of the basic components on it or something that any shop could fix, maybe you just have service shops.
Yeah.
And you could
Which
order
would
the
help
bike
control the
directly from internet.
cost too.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be slavish to the questions again, and I'm just gonna because none of us really talked about any cons. But cons, I will come back to what we talked about before with the warranty aspect. I mean, batteries that are wearing out if they're not a hot swappable setup, and even if they are. So firstly, there's an environmental impact that we'll get to later with that. But let's also not discount the cost. If you have any of these electrical bits taking a dump, like it's not like, I gotta.
Oh, I think some of the battery, like I was reading an article where I think the battery for the KTM is like $4,000 or $5,000.
It's most of the cost of the machine.
It's most of the cost of the
Well,
machine.
I was going to point out, in a 2-stroke or 4-stroke, whatever, doing a top end job usually isn't that bad. It's not that big a financial punishment. If you have something go wrong with an electric drivetrain,
depending on if you're talking about a single, it's not that bad. But if you're talking about like having to replace like the top end of a 4-cylinder drivetrain, like that's a pretty expensive job.
It ain't going to cost no $4,000 or $5,000 like you're talking about.
It's probably going to cost $1,500 to $2,000.
Well, think about
depending on what you have to have done.
We work on a lot of stuff, and a lot of us have battery-powered tools, drills and grinders and stuff like that. And all of my heavy tools, hand tools that I use frequently, I buy the corded version because the batteries are so expensive to replace. By then, you might as well just replace the whole thing.
And they get you onto a system too, right? Because then all your stuff has to be, if you're 36 volt DeWalt, like that's all your stuff has to be that, or you get locked into a manufacturer. Kind of sucks.
part of the problem with the majority of the cost of the thing, whether it's a motorcycle or a tool, being the battery. the rest of the thing is kind of not built that well. You know, like the first, like I rode.
You know what? Actually, I don't agree with that.
I don't agree with that.
Well, I rode an earlier Zero.
Did you think that Alta was not built well?
No, the Alta is built very well. But I rode an earlier Zero, and I kind of felt like, you know, most of the money had gone into the battery and the motor, and the rest of it kind of didn't feel all that great.
I don't know. I've ridden a later one, man. I felt like it was.
Yeah, maybe that
nice.
was just a byproduct of being early, but still, I think
I keep
you
thinking
know
back to that Impulse, which was like $20,000, and I kind of agree with Joe on that one. Like the rest of the bike didn't impress me that much. I just felt like, I mean, I like the innovation.
I think
of
they're
it, but was it
losing
worth-
money on the rest
But was
of
it
it.
worth $20,000? Like you could have bought an SV650 for about $5,000 and had a comparable motorcycle.
I'm not going to argue that point with you. All right, let's get that out of here. Speaking of the Impulse, well, this is a short question, and you guys are going to have probably more to say about this than anything else. Gears or no gears? Do we need a transmission on an electric motorcycle?
no gears.
Gears.
You want gears?
I do.
No gears
You said
needed.
no gears. Well, defend your battle.
Well, I mean, it's one of those like ancillary systems that's not needed for electric. You know, that I understand, you know, obviously an internal combustion engine is only efficient in a certain small RPM range, where you do need a transmission to take advantage of keeping the motor in that particular RPM range. But an electric motor makes 100% peak torque as soon as it turns on. So, you know, and it has almost like infinite RPMs, you know, the bearings are so good now, and there's brushless motors, and you could spin the things to the moon. There's just no need for a transmission. So why have the additional parasitic drag? Why have to deal with maintaining a clutch? You know, no transmission on electric bikes for me.
Ladies
and gentlemen, that's his answer.
No, I get all those arguments, and it all makes sense. I think for me, like even like from the standpoint of like riding the DCTs that Honda has out, like I still like shifting.
Yeah,
I would have to have
shifting is
you would
fun.
Have, you would have to get. Well, I guess my point is I don't think that for the kind of riding I'm doing, the DCT performance gives me what I'm looking for out of the bike. I can't get it to act the way I want it to act by controlling it manually. If you're telling me that there
Even
can be
on
a
pedal
system,
shifters?
no, no, absolutely not. Like I can't get it to do instantaneously what I want it to do the way that I can with a clutch. And that's just, maybe I haven't spent enough time with it. I don't know. I've spent some time with it, more so than I'm
But
guessing
that's
most people
still
don't own the bike.
that's there to take advantage of the narrow
Listen,
efficiency
I'm
of an
open-minded.
internal
If you
combustion
think
engine.
if you think that the engineers can put something together that I'm going to be able to ride and be like, oh my God, this is so much better than manually being able to
Dude,
overcome
the
my brain.
Alta, just being able to like wrap it from 0 to 70 and carry the front wheel was pretty rad.
So I rode the KTM, the Freeride,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the biggest problem for me is that it's wrapping my brain around it. It's
Mm-hmm.
wrapping my brain around like this isn't what I do anymore
Yeah.
to get it to act. So maybe it's just the fact that like I need to spend more time with the system.
Yeah.
And just getting over what I'm already used to.
Yeah, you have
But-
to change. You know, you have to set your expectations. I think it would be easier, honestly. You know, something we didn't get to. I don't know if it's in your pile of questions. Is the
I
ease
like
of
how
a
he's
new
looking through his
rider?
pile of questions. Like I don't know.
You know,
What
for
is
a
it-
new
is it
rider
in
to
this
get
pile?
on an electric bike and not have to worry about learning the clutch and learning about shifting and just be like, oh, this is go and this is stop, and you can make it have handbrakes like a bicycle
I had
and not
said
have
actually,
any foot pedals.
When I
or
tested
pegs.
the Zero, I'd said if there was you could really whack the throttle down on that thing. That's
Perfect
a bike I
learner
would
bike.
put a new rider. I
Yeah.
mean, with the exception of the cost, like you could do way worse.
So you
for
talk
yourself.
about new riders. Harley Davidson recently just made an investment in Staycycle, the little pedalless bikes for kids. So I've been
riders.
watching that company for like the past 3 years or so on Instagram because they've just got these really great posts, and I've been sending them over to my sister-in-law, telling her that I'm buying my nephew one of these bikes. But watching Harley Davidson invest in that company and buy that company out, I think was so smart because you can get kids involved in motorcycle. I mean, essentially motorcycling. They're little BMX bikes with no pedals and an electric engine on it.
Their displays are adorable. I don't know if you've actually been.
Yeah,
to like one. Oh,
they
so
had them
cute.
at
Kids
the
zipping
motorcycle
around.
show this year, the Progressive Motorcycle Show, and they were watching these kids go around inside. Like you talk about getting new riders into motorcycling, what a great step. And
just
like
make
you
it
said,
easier.
it's just pull back on the throttle. There's 3 different power settings. You can go from like 5 miles an hour up to 11 miles an hour. I thought that was such a really smart move on Harley's part, and it'll be interesting to see what they do with the company.
Well, it's just like the first bike I ever rode that had a twist throttle was a Z50 Honda that had no clutch. You know, just a little slush box, 1, 2, 3 gearbox. And I mean, I think that helped me not be so intimidated. If my first bike was my RM80 that I later had that had super peaky power and a real sticky clutch and things like that, you know, I might have been like, forget it, that's too hard, you know?
So I'm going to actually kind of, I think, take the position in between you guys. And I would say some gears. So here's why. Maybe some gears. To your point, I agree with you. Yes, you can spin an electric motor to the moon. It peak torque all the time, blah, 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 whatever. The one thing I think you're leaving out of the equation is wind resistance. When you start moving quickly on a motorcycle, the wind resistance really starts to pile up quickly. So the optimal gear ratio, I think, for your around town stuff and your high-speed highway stuff is not the same. Can you use the different gear? Sure, but I think you're blowing through battery power. Now, the question becomes, from a packaging perspective, are you better off with more room for a battery and no transmission taking up space, or are you better off building a slightly smaller battery with a gearbox? And I think that is a question that's yet to be answered. I think thus far, impulse aside, it seems like no gearbox is the way to go. But I could see maybe two different ratios being appropriate. Now, in the car world, look at a Tesla, for instance. Obviously they have way different packaging constraints and they have a lot more freedom. But I think Tesla was having trouble trying to implement a transmission on at least one of their cars, and they wound up with 2 separate electric motors, but with slightly different gear ratios for that exact same reason. And I think that there's something to be said for not discounting.
But that's the big advantage of cars, right? Is that cars have a lot more room than I have in a motorcycle.
And that's what I'm saying. So it's different for a car, obviously. Like the packaging constraints are much different.
Yeah, the whole bottom of a Tesla is a battery, pretty much, right?
They're
and keep in mind, I mean, that's the biggest thing with motorcycles too, from a size perspective, but also a weight perspective.
Yeah,
you can't have some big, heavy, 600, 700 pound bike if you're trying to take it off road or even on the street.
All right, we hashed that one out.
No gears.
That was not what we agreed upon.
That
was just your answer. We didn't agree to your answer.
Multi-speed, no speed, maybe some
I was just
speed.
happy that we finally answered a question like somewhat concisely. It only took 10 minutes.
Listen, man, I'm open-minded. If your answer
neither of you
ends
guys,
up being...
all three, neither of us, none of us would be considered concise in any way, shape, or form. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Are e-bikes a cure-all? And if they're not, and I think that an argument could be made that maybe they're not, what are some of the negative environmental impacts of these things? I mean, we talk all the time about how, it's going to reduce emissions, but there are some negative impacts come along with these. What are some?
Where does electricity come from?
Trees.
Right.
Everyone knows that. It's growing on trees.
Electricity is not free. We have natural gas, we have coal, and we have nuclear power, the top 3 sources of electricity in this country.
Honestly, digging in on this subject before we got in there, I was kind of overwhelmed with how much fossil fuel is burned to create electricity.
Yeah.
And that really took some wind out of my sails about it.
I'm sure that everybody out there driving around in a Tesla or a hybrid, or it's not even a hybrid, but
they're thinking I am not burning the fuel,
right?
But
they're thinking about the benefit they're making, and they're like, I just plug it in, and this electricity is clean, and it comes as from nowhere. But
it's nice to think that it all comes
from
the beautiful, quiet windmills and solar panels.
It
but
does not.
That's less than a third of the
and you look at the top 3 sources of power in America, and with natural gas, you have fracking. Coal mining obviously has its own environmental implications, and nuclear. I'm actually watching the Chernobyl documentary right now, and so nuclear has its own its own world of problems. So I don't think it's a be all to end all when it comes down to this whatsoever.
I know, but I think nuclear power definitely has the potential to certainly be helpful. I'm going to talk about environmental impact, and note the opinions you're about to hear expressed are the opinions of Lem and not necessarily those of RevZilla. But as far as an environmental impact about an electric bike that I really enjoy, it makes riding in places that you shouldn't be riding an awful lot easier.
Noise pollution.
Yeah, I'm not saying I have, but I have definitely snuck around and ridden an electric bike in some places that I wasn't supposed to be riding an electric bike.
Yeah.
Nobody was the wiser.
Super duper hooligan stuff.
I think it also probably improved. And now, had I done what I probably should have done, is not been riding in a spot where I wasn't supposed to be riding. Had I gone to, say, a private landowner and said, "Hey, I'd like to buzz around your land. Do you mind if I do? Check it out. It's an electric bike. It's totally silent." I think that would probably A, help with land access. B, it would probably help perception of, I think, the off-road crowd in general. But the other thing I was going to say, just and this is, we talk about environmental impact. Everything we talk about fairly global, but let's go super local. I think it's pretty nice to ride a bike and just roll off the throttle, and the only things you hear as you kind of come into a clearing in the woods or wherever it is that you're rolling up is just the crunchier tires on the gravel.
Yeah,
you know? And you
it
can
takes
sit there
it
and
more
munch a
to
granola
where
bar
you'd be
and-
like on a mountain bike. You know, like that's one of my favorite things about mountain biking is how quiet it is, and you're really in tune with what's going on around you. When I rode the Alta last year at the Conserve the Ride, you know,
It was bonkers.
it was bonkers. And I took it out and I did like a flat out land speed rip down the road. And I was like blown away with how powerful it was and how nicely it was made. But the most fun I had on it was screwing around in the campground and just riding like
Crazy low
super
speed,
tight, like
yep.
super low speed and quiet, riding around
Well,
people's
think about it, I would
tents and stuff like
destroy
that.
my front yard if I knew that I
Yeah.
didn't have two-stroke sounds, just
that's just
annoying
it.
the
Also,
neighbors
but
all the
it's-
time.
but this
You
goes
could
back
use
to
it in
I would
your
have a
yard.
mud
But
pit
this
in my
goes back
front
to
yard.
even outside the dirt segment. You know, one of the biggest problems with, like, look at Laguna Seca. The reason that Laguna Seca is having so many problems with running races there and keeping the track open is because of noise pollution.
Yeah, right. the
So
land
if you
around
could
there,
get if
yeah.
you could get electric powered sport bikes that were, you could run them right next to
Or
a housing
drag
development.
strips,
Nobody would
too.
even know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, drag strips are a big deal. I looked up some electric drag bikes online and check it out if you have a few minutes.
That's
I
another
mean,
wonderful application
Dude,
for electric.
200 mile an hour, quarter mile electric drag bike that's completely silent. Like, that is cool. You can't deny that that is not amazing.
It's pretty neat.
Can't deny it. Challenge.
It's
you.
undeniable.
Challenge.
It's simply
Challenge you to
undeniably
deny
Zito
it.
has spoken. It's
mind-blowing.
not deniable. Can't be denied.
I also like kind of like the hacker, you know, aspect of it, you know, because obviously anybody who's a gearhead whatsoever is going to figure out how to modify these things for speed and power. So these people that are building these
I
land
don't
speed
think I will
racing
do that.
bikes and drag racing
Would you
bikes,
say I don't think
No.
no.
no, I think that's super cool. Go fast. Make things super fast.
It's weird. You got to wonder what those guys are going to smell like. We smell like gas and oil. What are they going to smell like?
Lightning bolts.
Just burns. What are the improvements that have to occur to give electrics the boost they need to go mainstream? Like what needs to happen to see these things more regularly rather than like these weird curiosities at bike night?
It's going to have to be better than a four-stroke engine. It's going to have to be better than what we have in some way. So
Can it
all
be
right,
more expensive,
So
though?
I mean, it depends on how much better it is. So when I take a trip on my adventure bike, I can usually milk about 200 miles out of a tank. That's pretty far. By then, I'm ready to get off the bike and take a little break. So if you give me an electric bike that can go 250 and will take a half an hour or less to recharge so I can rip cross country on it, I'm in.
I'm willing to sacrifice range for recharging speed. Okay, so if you can only give me 150 miles out of a battery, I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
If I can recharge it in under half
I think
an hour.
most people would agree with
and
you.
that's where I'm at because
Yeah.
like chances are I need a break after 150 miles anyway. I don't mind pulling over and plugging the thing in and letting it charge, but I need places to charge it too.
You need
so
time
the same
to
way,
eat enough ice cream cones.
but,
so
but that's the
you're
same way.
ready
But
to
you
get
talk
back on
about
the
you talk
bike.
about the internal combustion engine being 130 years old, but we forget that gas stations didn't come around until much later.
Yeah.
So people had to carry their own gasoline with them places, and they were
Right.
trying to figure
Yeah,
out
that's
where
true.
to pick up
Well, hang on.
gasoline.
I want to skew Zito for a second. So
Okay.
you just
I'll-
said
I'll take a back
go back
seat.
to your go back to your Tiger. You just said now what was the figures you gave me on that? It was how many miles?
200 miles and recharge in half an hour.
Okay.
250 miles for the electric bike.
Okay. What your rigid Triumph? What's your range like on that?
My butt or the engine?
I don't care what they call the engine. Or the tank.
If
guess
I
would be
can
the-
endure riding it, I mean, that bike, I think I could usually get 100 miles out of that bike. Well, it's got hot cams and stuff like that. It's kind of hopped up.
But I guess what I'm saying though is to me, I think that your threshold is lower. I think you're holding electrics to too high a standard. And
But it has to be better.
Well-
Because why? I mean, there's so many incredible
have to be
internal.
better?
Well, I mean, think about it. There's so many incredible internal combustion engine bikes being sold and being produced that'll keep coming out. It's going to have to be considerabably better.
aren't
for
you
people.
building another Triumph chopper right now?
Yeah, it's so
is it
dumb.
going to be
It's just
better
because
than
they're
the-
cheap.
Well, so now if we're talking the performance to price aspect, I think there's something to be said there. But and you just hit upon what I think could be the biggest and most important thing, and nobody likes to talk about it because it doesn't sound cool on the internet to say that's an awesome thing, but I don't have the money for it. I think price is the big problem, and I had asked Joe actually before this. We hadn't talked too much about it. I didn't want to because I said that I had a gotcha question for him, and you're arguably one of the biggest proponents of electric motorcycles I know. So here's my gotcha question: why don't you own one?
Honestly, dude, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good question to ask me, considering that last year I was ready to pull the trigger on that Alta, and I was thinking, man, like when we go ride dirt bikes, we go for I rode just yesterday morning. We rode for 4 hours. there's no way that bike would have lasted 4 hours of riding trails and sand and climbs and all this stuff. And then it's like when we go riding, like we're not on a motocross track. We ride enduro, we ride woods. Yeah. We're 20, 30 miles into the forest. So if the thing takes a dump, you know, I got to get towed out, or I got to go ride on the back of somebody else's bike to get my truck and go pick it out of the woods. I mean, I have to burn fuel for now because, you know, it's available.
You just need to carry a little generator.
So again, that goes back to range and chargeability. To answer your question as far as price, interestingly enough, I was riding in this morning, and on NPR there was a conversation about Chrysler and who
That's not interesting at all.
And who they're partnering with, because they don't have the electric infrastructure the way that other car manufacturers do. And they were saying the hard part is that as the economists are seeing a slow decline in automotive sales, that now they have to invest even heavier into the future for what's going to not pay off for probably 5 to 10 years down the road from an automotive standpoint. So from a pricing standpoint,
if it pays off at all,
if it pays off at all. So it's a big gamble. But I think the only way that you're going to see this catch on with motorcycling is you're going to have the OEMs almost subsidize the electric motorcycles. They're going to have to just eat some of the cost and sell it, and they don't have, and they're not in the position, but they're not in the position to do that.
Right.
But that's the way that I see this taking off. Like when KTM brought the Freeride in, they were selling that original batch for I think like $10,000 or $11,000. But in Europe got the new ones, and they were selling for like 15 or 16 equivalent. And so essentially, what KTM did was they subsidized the first batch to come to America by bringing the old ones in and kind of offloading them on the American public to just whet the appetite. But you're gonna have to see more of that, because you're right, the price $20,000 for an Impulse when I could buy an SV650 for $6 brand new, it's not. I'm not investing in that, especially when I don't have the range and the rechargeability. I think if you can figure out the range and the rechargeability, I would be very interested in an electric dirt bike. Probably not a street bike.
I think it's price. I think ultimately it comes right down to price.
But I think the price is going to have to be subsidized in order to get it to where it's at.
When Harley's smaller models come out and they're made available here, I'll be curious to see how those do, simply because they are electric bikes at a lower price. I'd be very
but how much lower? The Livewire is $30,000.
So the Livewire is like their Halo product. I'm talking about those smaller ones they showed, the one that looked a little bit like a mountain bike, another one looks like a mini bike.
How much cheaper do you think? I mean, I've seen mountain bikes already that had the little battery packs on that are $10,000. Like you're paying $10,000 for an electric mountain bike?
Like I said, I even come farther south there. I think people accept lesser capability for different jobs if the price is.
Well, like those little kids bikes I was talking about, right? Like the price on those was like $600 for like the little battery powered bikes. I thought that was like extremely accessible for kids. If parents could buy it as a Christmas present, something like that. But can you get the next step up down to a similar price point?
Well, and I don't know, maybe that doesn't have to happen, like maybe that is the next step for electric motorcycles. Like I said, I mean, a Pee-wee 80 would be perfect, I substitute in an electric bike for that. Yeah. I mean, it's not like some kid on a Pee-wee is going to be going on a 50-mile ride.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, but I guess that's like the next step up from there is where can we see it start to pick off at the smaller bikes?
A lot of folks, that are considering electric bike consider it maybe as their second or their third bike. Like, we have a guy here who commutes on one regularly, but he has other gas-powered bikes. And I personally was going to say, like, this, if Alta stayed around, I would have considered it as maybe a backup dirt bike or something that I could practice on in my yard, or maybe ride some illegal trails.
Yeah, but for what like cost? You're going to spend $10,000 to $15,000 on a backup dirt bike.
Right. That's your tough proposition.
I don't have that. Yeah.
Motorcycle industry is already struggling to sell people one motorcycle. Yeah. Selling them two is a difficult.
Lem was talking about in the last episode, I think it was, when you're like, I have a $10,000 toy.
Yeah.
And it's like, we all do. Like, I have $10,000 invested in a bike that I had to put into the back of my $25,000 pickup truck, and then I'm not gonna. Yeah, it's a very bad investment when I'm looking at this from the fiscal returns.
I mean, I was like super bummed to hear that that the Alta, the bottom fell out. I really had the highest hopes because
motorcycle.
I mean, getting to ride it and see it in person and see how well it was built and how like competitive at motocross, and they went to Erzberg, and
that was a lovely motorcycle.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so well built, and getting to ride it, and like for almost the best electric bike that I've seen so far, have the bottom fall out of the company, like on a bike that I was really considering buying, it's a huge bummer, So I don't know. Hopefully, somebody else picks up where they left off, or maybe they bought the company or whatever. I don't know.
But I mean, the possibility exists too. That could be sort of a bellwether for electric motorcycles in general. That's probably a good stopping point for the episode. Now, thanks folks for tuning in to another episode of Highside, Lowside. Of course, we got the end of the season episode coming up for the next one.
Next one, yeah.
This has been I thought this was a pretty fun episode. I really liked some of this. Hopefully, you guys do too. I'll be interested to read some of the comments. Of course, I think we'll see some mainstream comments, but also some ones that go against the current.
Oh, wow. You really stayed up all night last night.
I would say, how many did you spend the weekend
I got
riding?
them for days. For Spurgeon and for Joe, I'm Lem. This has been another episode of Highside, Lowside. Thanks for tuning in. We're out of here.
My favorite form of electricity.
You an AC man? DC?
I was going to say AC/DC. Together.
That's not how that works.
Oh, it is.
All right.
For the best sounds.